That's why I always give it, it's good to give it at midline because they will instinctually go with their preferred hand.
Liana, because we're live.
Oh, you need me to talk? Okay.
Microphone or it's not recorded.
Sure.
Or not. Sorry.
Does that make sense?
So as a teacher, I know that a lot of times kids will do certain tasks, like if they only write with their right hand, let's say, but they do something else with another activity, should we still be trying to use one dominant hand? If they always are doing their art projects and they're writing with the one hand, is that sufficient? And then maybe they throw a ball.
With their left hand, that's fine. Yeah, I think whatever they're instinctually doing, it's more if you see them changing mid-task, that's when you have more of, that's when it's more of a red flag. So not if they're starting with the hand, like if they're starting with the hand and then switching to the other hand, that's when it's more of an issue.
What if they do certain activities with one hand differently with different hands?
I think that most parents know their child. So if you know that your child writes with their right hand and cuts with their left hand and they're good and the skill is they're not getting tired, they're just as neat with both hands as they're doing it, you know, they always cut with their left hand and they always write with their right hand and it's functional, that's fine. Yeah. And then holding a fork in like in a grown-up way or in a standard position. Is there a better place? No, it's okay. Maybe I just want to make sure. I think it will stay. I just don't know how. Is this okay or is this not loud enough? Or do I closer? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good?
Yeah.
Okay. I think so. Yeah. So this is just a typical fine motor development progression chart. So it shows you kind of that 1 to 1.5, they're using more of that fisted grasp. Then from 2 to 3, they go into that digital pronated grasp. So they're coloring up with their finger pointed down. By 3.5 to 4, they're in a modified tripod. So they might be using 4 fingers or 3 fingers. They still might not be, they're not usually moving their fingers. They're still kind of using that whole arm movement. And then by 4.5, they're in that more refined dynamic tripod where they're moving at their fingertips. They're able to do those more small refined movements. Their wrist is resting on the, you know, on the paper or the table, and they just have more control overall. Also with the grasp, again, the web space, important for endurance and control as well. Because if you see a grasp that's a dynamic tripod grasp, sometimes you'll see kids that hold their thumb closed like this or wrap their thumb under like this. And that's really hard for not only control, but endurance also. Sometimes you see kids who they're pushing they're in this 3-point grasp, but their web space is closed, and that's so that they have more control, but it's very tiring, so they're not gonna be able to do the task for a long time, and also they're not gonna have as much fluidity and movement in their fingers as well. So it's really important to encourage that big web space, and we're gonna get into some activities that will encourage, and tasks that will encourage building the strength in the web space so that they have that movement and are able to do those fine motor skills well. So this is the typical more visual motor chart. So kind of first they're just scribbling, and then by 2 they're making a vertical line. By 2.5 they're imitating a horizontal line, then a circle around 3, a cross around 4, and then a square, an X, and a triangle by around 5. And again, these are important because these are all precursors to handwriting. So these show that they're integrating their visual motor skills well, that they're able to copy. These are all important, you know, once you get into school and you have to copy off the board, or you have to copy, you know, work in front of you or do your math, you have to be able to copy shapes and letters well and integrate your visual motor skills well. So some of these not by itself, but if they're not doing these things, could be a red flag that there might be a visual motor issue. And again, a lot of these things that I'm saying, if it's just one thing that you're seeing, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a difficulty. But it's more if you see multiple things, multiple red flags, that you might want to consider having your child be assessed for occupational therapy. So the foundations of fine motor development, it's important to have, fine motor skills come from your postural stability, which is you have to have a good, strong core. You have to have good upper body strength and what we call shoulder girdle strength. And with those then come the ability to have that more refined fine motor strength and control. So if you have a weak shoulder girdle, or if you have poor trunk control and trunk strength, your fine motor skills are not going to be able to be as refined, and you might see delays in your child's fine motor. You can build core strength from play activities like climbing. You can do stuff on Bosu balls or peanut balls where they reach and grab for puzzle pieces and put them in puzzles. There's lots of different activities that you can do to build core strength just through play. The next thing would be tactile perception. So if they have poor tactile perception, they're not going to be able to have as refined fine motor skills also. Tactile perception is when you feel the things around you into your fingertips and then are able to produce whatever movements you need to be able to complete that task. So think about the analogy I like to use for a child that maybe has poor tactile perception would be like when you're washing dishes and you have those thick rubber gloves on. How easy do you think it would be to take off like a necklace? It's really difficult because you're not feeling where the little pieces are. It's very hard. So a child that has poor tactile perception may also have difficulty with some of those refined fine motor tasks. An activity that you can do to improve tactile perception, you can have like a rice bin or a bean bin and have different toys in there. And without their vision, have them feel for those toys and build that tactile perception skill. So the next thing would be bilateral coordination, so using both of your hands together and being able to do things like building, opening containers, holding your lunchbox and unzipping it. Those are all things that require good bilateral coordination skills. And if you're not using both hands together well, some of those tasks might be hard. Even things like coloring and writing. If you're only using one hand to color, your paper is not going to stay where you want it to stay. So it's very important to have that good bilateral coordination skill. And then hand function is just your grasp. That's part of hand function, is that the fine motor development, the grasp, your hand and finger movements, in your hand and finger strength, and then also your wrist stability and positioning is important. So like I talked about before, as the child develops, they don't start by having their wrist resting while they're doing these fine motor tasks and coloring and stuff. But as they move through the stages of development and they build that strength and get those more refined skills, you'll see them start to rest their wrist on the paper or on whatever they're doing, because that gives more control also and helps with the endurance as well. Yes? Yeah, you always want the child to hold the page with the other hand. Yes, that's important to always encourage. Yeah. And I'll go through a little bit more, so the postural stability. So this is actually some things that you can also do to improve postural stability and upper body strength. So floor activities, I like to encourage kids to lie on their stomach and put the paper on the floor, or put whatever they're doing, their puzzle on the floor, and their weight bearing into their shoulders, so they're kind of in this position while they're doing things, and they're building up Also, working on a vertical surface, so taping up a page to a wall or a window and having them color, they're building that strength, and also it's putting their wrist in the proper position. Things like wheelbarrow walking and crab walking are really great also. So wheelbarrow walking is when you hold the feet up and they walk on their hands. So they're building the strength in their upper body, and also they're building the arches in their hands and the strength in their hands as well. And also, if you have a sensory-seeking kid, it's a very good activity to get that input into their hands and into their body as well, so that proprioceptive feedback, which we'll get into a little bit more later. And then things like monkey bars, playground, Play-Doh, all good for upper body and hand strengthening as well. And then I kind of went into this a little bit already also, but the tactile perception, so activities that you can use to improve tactile perception, the rice bin, a mystery bag also, so putting a bunch of objects in a bag and having the child reach into the bag and find, say you have like a cotton ball and a race car and a penny and a dice, and you say, okay, without looking, I want you to find the penny. And they have to reach in and feel for what it is and then pull out the penny. A lot of times also with tactile perception, you might see if the child has difficulty, maybe they're holding the pencil or the crayon really tightly or very loosely so they can't use it well. Also, clumsy child, that would also lead into body awareness, which is a sensory processing difficulty as well. And then maybe they're always dropping things because they're not feeling that perception of how to hold it in their hand, like maybe a Ziploc bag or things like that, where maybe they're holding it and then it just drops out consistently. These are all things that not just happens once in a while, these are things that you see consistently. And then with the bilateral coordination, some activities that you can do. I really like cooking activities. So cooking is something that kids really usually enjoy doing and is fun and is a really great bilateral coordination activity, fine motor, motor planning, so ability to follow multi-step direction. It really incorporates a lot of things into one activity. So having them hold the bowl with their if they're right-handed, hold the bowl with their left hand, mix with their right hand, or hold the bag with their hand and cut with their other hand. Open the box with two hands. There's a lot of opportunities to use two hands together. Play-Doh activities also are really great. So things like rolling out the Play-Doh into a snake, using the ice cream Play-Doh, so to put it in, hold it, push it down, using all the Play-Doh tools like the cookie cutters and stuff are really good. And then pouring activities are really good for bilateral coordination also. So especially during the summer, during the year you could do things like pouring sand or pouring rice or you could do pouring water during the year also, but summer is a really great opportunity to get outside and do a lot of water play with pouring into different containers and things like that, and it really encourages using both hands together. And then songs of clapping. So like anything where they have to imitate clapping or use two hands together, especially at younger ages, is encouraging bilateral coordination as well. And then hand function, the muscles all need to work well together to control small objects like pencils and crayons, so making sure that their grasp, strength, and wrist stability and positioning are where they should be is important. Yeah. Yes. So the optimal positioning of where a child is sitting for all those tasks would be that their feet are flat on the floor and they're in that 90-degree angle, and their elbows are at the table height. So, for example, you really want, without having to scoot to the front of the chair, you really want them to be in a good 90 degrees, and their elbows should be able to rest comfortably right where they're coloring or writing. You don't want them leaning down too far. You don't want them reaching up like this. They're going to tire easily, and they're not going to do their best work. And you don't want their feet dangling either, because if their feet are dangling, that they're having to use their core muscles, and core So some activities to improve grasp. So picking up small items like beads or pennies. I like to use Theraputty a lot. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Theraputty, but it's basically like a Play-Doh, but like a very thick, resistive Play-Doh. And I like to put small items in here like pop beads or pennies or pony beads. I like the pop beads because they have to look through them. They have to look through the putty to find the pop beads, and then they push into each other. So it's working on multiple skills. It's working on hand strength. It's working on that pincer grasp. It's working on bilateral coordination. They have to push it together. So there's lots of good skills with Theraputty. Also, peeling stickers is a good one. So again, I really like to incorporate as many skills into an activity as possible. So peeling stickers, I would probably put stickers on the child's non-dominant arm, have them peel them off, because then they're focusing on their body awareness of their other side as well, and maybe put it up on a vertical surface to work on shoulder girdle strength also. So put it on a page up there on the wall or something, and then you're working on the fine motor, the bilateral coordination, the body awareness, the shoulder girdle strength, and again, addressing multiple needs, if those are their needs, obviously. Small beading also is good for grasp. So that just anything where you're really using that tripod, that 3-point grasp for refined movement is really what we're looking for. So having them make you a necklace, or having them make your parent or grandparent a keychain, or their sister anything where you can make it functional so that they're playing, but they're working on the skill as well. Lacing also, so lacing like a shoelace in and out of holes, or doing the lacing cards. Tweezers and tong games I really like. So this is one of them here. This is the Feed the Monkey game. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they have like a lot of different, they have like a puppy one and a few other ones. But basically it's you use the tweezers or tongs, so you're encouraging that 3-point grasp, building the web space strength, and building really overall hand strength, and picking up the bananas and feeding the monkey. So it's just a game that encourages fine motor and hand strength for pre-writing and fine motor tasks. And then Q-tip art. So any art where you're using a Q-tip really encourages that 3-point grasp. And I like to cut my Q-tips in half so the kids have a very little Q-tip to work with, because it really encourages them to use that 3-point grasp for the Q-tip art. And then writing tools that facilitate good grasp. So again, anything that's short and fat or small that they can use is ideal, especially at this age, because they're really building habits right now also. So if they're using small pieces of crayons or little pieces of chalk, they're really forced to use that 3-point grasp. I usually break crayons and have them use the small pieces. Also the crayon rocks, I know you guys they use here at Aliyah, and they're fantastic. They're these little rocks that, again, encourage that 3-point grasp. They have a little point for your thumb. You use 2 fingers. You can't stick any more fingers. You cannot use the wrong grasp on this. It's really impossible. I mean, if you try to use it like this, you're not going to be able to color, so you really have to use it the correct way. And then it's just a great tripod encouraging crayon. Sure. Oh, Theraputty? Theraputty. You can get it on Amazon. They have different strengths. This is the blue one, which would probably be best for preschool age. Then it goes green, and then like yellow, red, black. They're all different resistances. Yes, but much more resistive. Yeah, and there's different exercises that you can do with it too, but for kids, the best thing is really just hiding things in it, having them use their fingers to pull and find things in it, and then you can have them squeeze it and pull it apart and push it back together and stuff like that. It's a really great strengthening activity. So then activities to improve hand and finger strength also. Spray bottles are great. During the summer or throughout the year, really in California, you can have your kids help you, water the plants or write letters in chalk on the ground and then have them spray the letters with the spray bottle with water. It's really building, again, that web space strength and the hand strength, so the resistive pulling of the spray bottle is really good. Wheelbarrow walking we talked about, cups and transferring materials between cups. Play-Doh activities, also hand and finger strengthening activities with the making balls with the Play-Doh and rolling it. Hole punchers or scissors, they really like. Kids, I don't know if you've given your child a hole puncher, but they're obsessed and they love it, and it's a really good hand strength activity as well. And then feed the mouth tennis ball, so you could take a tennis ball and just cut a slit in the tennis ball to make like a mouth, have them draw some sort of face on it, and then feed the tennis ball pennies or pony beads or whatever it is, just to hold it open and build that strength again. So some tools that facilitate the proper wrist positioning, I kind of touched upon, but things like vertical positioning of easels or taping materials up on walls really encourage that correct wrist positioning. Also, the busy boards, I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's basically like a board of just a bunch of stuff to do that usually they have up on the wall. It's wooden. They have, keys that they lock and unlock, or latches that they switch, or pieces that move around on it. And it's, again, just a good, fun activity for kids to have that proper wrist positioning and move things around and maintain that adequate wrist positioning. So that is the main part of the fine motor and visual motor, and now we're going to move on to sensory processing a little bit. So are there any questions about the fine motor stuff before I move on to sensory processing? Okay. So sensory processing is the way that your body receives information and then the action that it outputs from that information turns it into a motor or a behavioral response. It's how our body responds to stimuli in the environment. Do we tune it in, or do we tune it out? Do we know where our body is in space to be able to do things like climb on the play structure, or sit in a chair without falling, or climb over an object without tripping? It also assists in our attention and our focus, or our self-regulation is part of our sensory processing system. Are we able to sit and attend and stay still? Are we constantly on the move? Are we seeking a lot of hugs? These are all things that our body is processing as we're taking in the information around us. Yes? So it's challenging, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't diagnose, obviously, but I will say that a lot of strategies that work for sensory processing often do work for children that do have attention or hyperactivity as well. It's a lot of those calming strategies that there's a lot of trial and error, but you will see that if you implement some of those strategies for a kid that has sensory processing difficulty or a kid that has ADHD, you will usually see similar results. So this pyramid shows that the sensory processing, the areas of sensory processing, so our vision, hearing, smell, touch, vestibular and proprioception, which vestibular is our balance and kind of knowing where our body is in space, and our proprioceptive feedback is kind of knowing where our body, the feedback that is going into our body to be able to tell us how much pressure to use, or how, when we're walking, if we're stomping really hard, if it's a kid who maybe doesn't have good proprioceptive feedback, they're stomping because that's how they know, how they're getting that feedback to know where their feet are on the floor. So that's what proprioceptive is. And that leads into sensory motor development, which is motor planning, bilateral motor control, postural stability, your ability to screen input, and then your reflexes, which then is important for your perceptual motor development, so like your language, your visual motor skills, your ocular motor control, your hand-eye coordination, and all of that is needed to be able to learn, have appropriate behavior responses, and complete all of your activities of daily living. So you can see that if one of these is not intact, it's very hard to be able to achieve the things above it. So how does sensory processing work? So you register sensory information through the nervous system. The brain modulates that information and organizes the input and then outputs a response. Then from that, the person responds with an action, whether it be an emotion or a behavior or what you've asked them to do. In cases when the child is not eliciting an appropriate response or they don't have an appropriate emotion, behavior, they're not doing what you've asked them to do, they might need more external support. So that's when you see more sensory strategies or modifications, maybe giving one direction at a time, giving more tactile prompts. So that's some of the things that we'll talk about, but that's when they might need more external supports at that point. So how does sensory processing affect behavior? So as you were talking about with ADHD and behavior, it's very hard to tease out sometimes what's behavior, what's sensory, what's ADHD, and all of that. But we're not really treating the diagnosis, we're treating the symptoms. So if someone has difficulty with regulation, you might see a kid who's very hyperactive, they're seeking a lot of sensory input, they're all over the place, or contrary, you might see a kid who's very understimulated, who has a very low activity, who's very just kind of sitting there and you need to say something a lot of times to get them to tune in. That would be an under-responsive child, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then they could also have problems with motor planning, so figuring out how to move their body and having poor coordination to be able to climb up on the play structure or to be able to walk up the stairs to get on the stage or to, they're not sure where their body position is. They might have a hard time doing things like action songs. So if the class is doing a song where they're doing, gestures and hand movements, they might have a really hard time doing that if they have difficulty with motor planning. And then problems with responses to input. So you might have kids who are either under-responsive, as we talked about, where they're not responding, or you also have kids who are in that fight or flight mode all the time. So maybe you just touch them and you say, "Hey, Johnny," and they scream and cry because you startled them and they're just overstimulated. It's too much for them. And their body isn't able to handle that input at that time. So the three types of sensory processing disorders would be over-responsive. So they're sensitive to things like textures, or maybe they don't like finger painting. They're oversensitive to sounds. Maybe they cover their ears when there's loud noises. You might see them squinting because things are too bright. Under-responsive, so that's the kid who maybe would be sitting on the carpet and maybe not participating as much, or maybe the teacher says, "Okay, get up and get your lunch and bring it to the table," and that child's still sitting there and not getting up to go to the table. They might need, again, like a tactile prompt or some sort of external support to be able to make that transition. And then you have your sensory seeker. So that's the child who sometimes is confused with the behavior child, or sometimes is confused with someone who has more hyperactivity. And sensory seeker would be they're your child who's crashing, hugging hard, just always seeking that input. Maybe I think I have slides on more detail, but they're maybe the kid who wants to eat really spicy food, or they're just always seeking more sensory input.
Is that the type of child who would, like, when they're playing with trucks, for example,
Rough, yeah, probably. Well, and playing with trucks, rough could be, there might be sensory seeking, or they might have poor body awareness also, so they're unaware of how hard they're really doing it because they're not they're the proprioceptive feedback seeker because they're not getting they're not getting the appropriate feedback. So to them, that hard rough might be normal. That might be what their body needs to get the feeling of moving the truck into something. So there's a lot of components, but it could be that, it could be the sensory seeking, or it could be behavior too. It's hard to know. Right. And again, is it happening consistently? Is it something that is impacting their function where they're constantly getting in trouble for doing the same types of activity? Are they constantly crashing? Are those children, is it like you have to look at what the behaviors are and see why they're doing. Like if they're all sensory seeking behaviors, then yes, I would say they might be a sensory seeking child. But if it's a bunch of different behaviors, it probably is more behavioral. Or patterns, exactly. Look for patterns, yes. So some calming sensory strategies, and some of these are for older kids also, but erasing the board, being the teacher's helper, having them, wash the desks and really get that pressure while they're scrubbing or pushing, carrying books to the library, or being the helper, carrying, something or pushing something to another room for the teacher. Running, jumping, climbing on the playground is really good calming input. Anything where you're getting that deep pressure is going to be calming. So wall push-ups, chair push-ups, animal walks like the wheelbarrow walks or bear walks where they kind of walk on all fours. They're really good for all kids, but if teachers, if you incorporate them into your daily routine at home and you say, okay, we have to go brush teeth, but your child is, very hyper at the moment or having a hard time calming their body, you can say, okay, I want you to do bear walks to the bathroom and then do 5 wall push-ups and then brush your teeth. So they might need external support to do all those things, but as they're doing those activities, the deep pressure activities should help calm the body and then help them then listen to follow those directions better. Squeezing and relaxing the muscles, hugs, kids that, in general, if you have a child who is upset, you'll notice when you give them a hug and that long, deep pressure hug, their body relaxes. You'll kind of see their muscles relax, and that's the deep pressure that is calming and relaxing the body. So you can imagine a child who has more difficulty modulating and regulating their sensory system, they might seek more of that because they might be in a constant state of fight or flight, or they might need just more of that to calm and be able to complete their daily routine. Sensory strategies for sounds. So a kid who's sensitive to sounds, again, maybe they cover their ears when there's the vacuum, or they run out of the room crying when there's a fire truck. And all kids have, no kid likes those sounds, or most kids do not like those sounds, but again, is it impacting them to the point of them not being able to function in their everyday life? Are they not going places because it's too loud? Or are they not wanting to, every time you turn on the vacuum, they run in their room and they start crying because it's too much? It's more of those extremes that we're looking for as red flags. So some things that we can look at when we're looking at sensitivity to sounds are giving one direction at a time, using short, simple phrases and being very direct, allowing extra time to process what's said. So sometimes with kids who are sensitive to sound, and also this goes with the kid who is under-responsive, you'll say something and you'll give them direction and they don't do it right away, so you say it again and you say it again and you keep repeating the direction and they're still not doing it and you get frustrated, but they need that extra wait time. So usually if you say it and they don't do it, you can maybe say it one more time, and if they still don't do it, you can kind of give them a 10-second lag time to process what's being said, and then if they still don't do it, you might need to give them a tactile prompt or something else. But a lot of times, every time you say the direction, they have to reset what you said to do, and it's very difficult for them, especially if they have sensitivity to sound. Also, you can place the child away from a noisy part of the room. You can warn before there's going to be loud noises, give them a heads up, hey, we're going to go to the fire station, the fire engine activity today, and they might put on the noises. It might be loud. If you need to cover your ears, you can, or if you need to wear headphones, I have them here for you, or if that's going to be too much for you, I can stay here with you, or we can go further away. So giving them that prep and giving them more control to be able to say if it's going to bother them, especially if it's a child who has those sensitivities. Yes? The sound of the ocean?
Yeah, bringing a child that does not like loud noises in the ocean, that it appears it's both the vastness of it and the sound of it that unsettles the child.
So I would wonder if it's the sound. There's so many things about the beach that are sensory overload, right? Like the sand, if they're tactilely sensitive, they probably don't like the sand. The sound, the smells, the fear of the unknown and the lack of control of the waves coming. I think there's probably a lot of pieces to that. So I think you'd have to tease out kind of what the difficulties are, but maybe starting in a more controlled environment where, maybe using wave music at home and maybe offering some of those ocean-like experiences in the comfort of the child's home. So maybe like getting sand or getting some water and getting the ocean sounds and trying to maybe just get them used to some of those experiences separately, and then moving towards the beach and maybe letting them dictate what they're comfortable with and what they're not. So not pushing them to do all of it at once, but maybe it's the first time you park in the parking lot and they're just gonna stay at the sand at the edge of the parking lot. And then maybe the next time, maybe or maybe even they won't even take their shoes off. Maybe they'll just have full shoes and clothes and they're just standing there. Maybe the next time they'll touch it a little bit. Maybe the next time they'll, go a little bit closer. And I think it's just building the comfort to be able to accept, to be able to complete that task. So it's really, you have to tease out where the issue is and then slowly integrate those into the child's experience. Rhythmic music in the background, instrumental music. Sometimes, just having that calming music is calming auditorily for kids who have sensitivities as well. Sensitivity to sights. So again, this happens more in older classes, but even in a preschool class, sometimes it can be very visually overstimulating. At home, it can be very visually overstimulating for a child. If there's a lot on the walls, or if there's lots of toys all over the place, if the lights are really bright. So a child who has difficulty with visual processing, you really want to kind of keep things minimal, not have a lot of things out at a time, dim lights, more bare walls are better because they're very visually distracted and easily overwhelmed. And then touch. Again, as I said, there's some kids who seek out touch and there's some kids who hate touch. So there's really strategies for both, and some of them are similar. A larger personal space or a carpet square or a place that you want them to be if they're not able to stay in their space and they're constantly touching and seeking out that touch from other people. Also, I've used a hula hoop before, so if you want them to sit in a certain space, having them be, in the hula hoop and that's their spot, or at dinner time, if you want them to stay in their seat and you have like a little, like a special cushion or something, you can use a sit and move cushion as their spot to give them that physical boundary. Also, for a kid who's sensitive to touch, who's oversensitive, they don't like light touch. So if you have a kid who is sensitive to touch, you want to use firm pressure when you're talking to them, when you're trying to get their attention, because that light touch can lead into a fight or flight mode where they maybe have a meltdown over that. And some ways, obviously, you can't always avoid if you're the child's in line at school or they're going to their cubby to put their stuff away, but you could help by making modifications like putting them in the front of the line or putting them in the back of the line or waiting till everyone puts their stuff away and then letting them go to their cubby. Also, on the opposite end, if you have a kid who's seeking out a lot of touch and in line, they're the kid who's touching and bothering everyone else, you can put them in the front of the line so that they're not distracted by the children behind them and not turning around to constantly touch those around them either. So you can use that both ways. And then sitting still or remaining in your chair on the carpet or whatever space you're in at home or at school. As I said, the sit and move cushion is a good one. So they just sit and they get that movement, but in their seats. There's also, you can have them be in different positions, like lying on their stomach, sitting on their knees. There are the TheraBands, which you can put at the bottom of your chair in the classroom or at home in your dining room. You can put a TheraBand and they push with their feet and they kick it so that it gives them some input and some movement, but they're still sitting at the table with you. There's also, I don't have it pictured here, but it's called a How to Hug chair. I really like it. It's a pressure chair, so it basically is like wood slats, and as you lean back, it kind of gives you a hug and gives you pressure. So that's a good strategy and tool for remaining still in your chair on the carpet as well. Some other ideas for attention to task and completing tasks. If you use a visual schedule, so a lot of times kids who have sensory processing difficulties or motor planning difficulty with self-regulation and attention to task, really do well with visuals and knowing what's going to come next. So just having clear pictures, and really at this age, real pictures are best. So like even at home, if you have a routine where you want them to get up in the morning, brush their teeth, get dressed, eat their breakfast, put their lunch in their backpack, get in the car, having that set as a schedule that they have to kind of like check off and do as they move through the morning is very helpful for them. Also, frequent breaks and movement breaks. Movement is so important at all ages. So giving them, if you notice that they're having a hard time and they're really wiggly, get them up and moving. Have them do a movement break. Have them do an animal walk. Have them do a freeze dance for 2 minutes, whatever it is. Positive reinforcement for completing tasks. So make sure that you're telling them good job when they're doing the things that you want them to do, and when they're completing the tasks that maybe are not as preferred also, make sure you give them a lot of positive reinforcement. Using a timer to focus attention is also important. So you can use a timer when you want them to complete a task in a certain amount of time, and you say, I need you to get dressed, so you can play with your toys for 2 more minutes. I'm going to set the timer, and then it's time to get dressed. Or you can do something that you know is non-preferred, that they don't really want to do, and you can say, look, we're going to do this task for 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever it is, and then when this timer is up, it can be your choice to choose something that you do want to do and figure out what that is beforehand so they know what they're working towards. And get moving. As I said, it's really, really important to move throughout learning and throughout your routine, your day. Kids benefit from a 5 to 7 minute sensory break a day. I say more than that, actually. I think as much as you can move, the better. Movement helps things stick in your brain better. It helps you learn better. I really suggest between each transition incorporating some sort of movement activity. I think it's really helpful, and the kids enjoy it, and it helps all kids, not just kids with sensory processing difficulties. Yes? Yes, so some of the things that we talked about, like freeze dance, Simon Says, animal walks, wall push-ups, wheelbarrow walks, any sort of movement activity, climbing on the app, like going outside and climbing on the play structure for a few minutes, jumping on the trampoline for a couple minutes. Oh, so that's just like in the learning environment, basically. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, because when I taught pre-K, that we did, not only did we do something like, this writing without tears and what we do here,
Right.
But we also paired it with zoophonics or jollyphonics, so that way they were doing, advanced lexicon, like that kind of stuff. And that's how they remembered the A. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of things online that are available for that.
Yes.
I felt like the kids remembered the sounds better.
Yes. And this is showing you that basically the amount of time that a child can sit or really should be sitting is not much more than their age. So they really do need breaks after basically a 3-year-old after 5 minutes, they probably need some sort of break. A 5-year-old after 7 minutes, they probably need some sort of break. In kindergarten, by the time they get to kindergarten, usually they're not sitting for more than 10 to 15 minutes before they do some sort of break, and that's even really a long time for some kids. So some kids might need things like a sit and move cushion or some sort of hand fidget, or you might see them changing their positioning while they're sitting on the carpet a lot, or getting up and getting down, because really this is what they're able to do, or even though the expectation might be more than what they're actually able to do at these ages once you get into school. Another really cute website, I don't know if you're familiar with, is Go Noodle. Oh, I don't have my internet. Hold on a second. Hold on, I'll just show you this real quick. So Go Noodle is a website that has just different dances and movement activities and just really cute activities that you can do that are 2 or 3 minutes long, some longer, but most of them are really short. And it just is Go Noodle, yeah. And it basically is just it's all movement activities. They're very cute, and the kids love them, and it's just a great way to, I don't have sound on here, I think. But they're all different just dances and activities and things for them to copy, and again, builds motor planning, gets them moving a little bit, great for self-regulation, and there's just different, you can look and see, there's just all different kinds of, yeah. Also, the yoga, the cosmic yoga is a really good, Cosmic Kids Yoga, that's a really good one for calming, having them follow directions, body awareness, having them move their bodies, that's another really great one.
So you just have
It's on YouTube. They have a channel also. Oh, so they just have all these cute dances. So those are 2 good resources if you want them to just put something on, get them reset, and exactly, something fun and positive for sure. Yeah, and then another one last thing also is I like to do, if you have a child who's very distracted and not listening and having a hard time focusing, Simon Says is always a very good one to just get them kind of refocused and reset. So it just kind of interrupts whatever's happening and has them start following some directions, and it kind of resets a tantrum or a mood or what, not listening to directions and stuff like that. So that's another good one. So I think that is it. Are there any other questions that anybody has? About I don't think I'm familiar with that. They trace them. Oh, I know what you're talking about. I mean, I think that as long as you're practicing correctly, because the habits that they're building now are going to kind of carry through forever, and they don't really teach handwriting as much in elementary school anymore. So I know here they're doing handwriting without tears, which is great. So I think if you encourage them to continue with the format that they're using with the handwriting without tears and that same formation, that'd be great. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Good.
That space that can be
Good.
implemented in our classrooms, and I shared, your paperwork with all the teachers, and I'm gonna share this presentation and leave the class.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for having me. That's okay.
It's too bad, but I'm gonna forward the link.
That's okay. If also if you want to come up and look, this is like a weighted pressure vest, so this is a good if you have a child who has a hard time fitting or it gets overstimulated or who's seeking out a lot of pressure, this is a good resource. They also have pressure clothes also, so if you have a kid who's constantly like seeking out that pressure, they have like long sleeve pressure shirts and shorts and stuff like that on Fun and Function. And then these are just some adapted scissors also. I don't know if anyone's interested in looking, but if your child is having a really hard time opening and closing regular scissors, they have just scissors that I'm sure you've seen that have the little thing that flips to make them spring loaded, which takes out the opening and closing, and they just have to close, which is kind of what these other scissors are too. These are just a spring loaded scissor that you just have to squeeze rather than the opening and closing. So when you have that weakness in the web space, thank you, then this is a good starter as well. And then these are loop scissors, which are really, we wouldn't probably use them here. I feel like you'd be fine with a spring-loaded scissor, but this is just another adapted scissor. So, yeah. You're welcome. Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. Oh. Yes. Yeah. What? Oh, are
I do the mommy and me.
oh, mommy and me. What's your name?
Kathy.
Kathy. Nice to meet you. I'm Liana.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I just came on stage. She's like, come on. Sorry, I missed it, but she'll share.
I think they recorded it, so
Oh, good.
yeah.
Okay, good. Where do you work?
I go to houses and private schools.
So early intervention stuff?
I do some early intervention, but mostly, yeah, preschool, elementary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I used to do early intervention, so we had PT and OT who were on board who would come and meet with the kids.
Yes.
0 to 3.
Yeah. So I've done 0 to 3, but I do mostly like 2. I mean, I actually do I've done high school, I've done seniors, I've done everything. So, yeah.
That's not someone getting into a senior and not how that's been?
Well, it's
Oh,
more,
accident. It's
or as you get older, like your strength, right? So it's hard to maybe get dressed or feed or things like that. So you're doing more strengthening and adaptations after a stroke or,
recovery.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So, no, it's not. I know. It's really.
Sorry I missed it.
Oh, that's okay.
I'll get the phone.
Thank you. You can take there's a handout right there if you want to take it on the chair. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. We were just talking about something. So,
Sure.
I remember from early intervention that it's not always, you don't want kids to skip steps. And we were just talking about it in class. I was going to go home and do some research, but
Like the crawling.
exactly. And I'm like, okay, here you are. You're like
Yeah.
a gift to me right now because we were
Yeah.
just talking about that.
Uh-huh.
And so what I was telling your mom, because I remember from early intervention, is that we would, if we had kids that walked
Oh.
without crawling, we would literally crawl with them
And do activities.
position them.
Yeah.
So what else should I say to this mom?
I mean, crawling is really important for a lot of reasons. It's important because the reciprocal movement and motor planning that they get from it's also, they're crossing midline more when they're in that that 4-point position for writing and fine motor tasks as they get older. I mean, even as babies, all those fine motor tasks, they're building all the arches in their hands and strengthening their upper body, their shoulder girdle. So if they're not crawling, I would encourage just activity like floor activities, like do things on the floor, have them do things where maybe they're having to weight bear on their shoulders and their hands still, for different art activities or different things that they do.
Would you put them on their knees and hands, and would you model, I had stuff like that when I broke my finger.
Yeah,
Really
it's
hard.
definitely.
It's strong.
It's
And then you can
really
have them,
strong.
pick the beads out, you can have them pull. And I mean,
Yeah.
try pulling it apart with 2 hands, you'll see. It's really good for all the upper body strength stuff.
Would you actually?
And do out more, because otherwise you're using your chest to help you.
Yeah, wow.
You're gonna build up those muscles,
Oh,
girlfriend.
yeah. And
Would
then to
you
get
put
the
them-
things out.
Sorry,
So, no, go ahead.
would you put the babies on their knees and rock them, or would you just?
I wouldn't necessarily emulate rocking like that, but I would maybe do more like having them crawl through tunnels to do activities, like maybe like puzzles or like different things where they have to go back and forth to like grab pieces or things
Okay.
like that, so they're in that position in a more functional way.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go. Thank you.
You're
In fact, I was thinking about a tunnel, because I knew I had one that
Uh-huh.
jumped through walking. Do you have any tunnels?
I think we do have, unless I'm giving you another school, but we might have something.
Okay. Yeah,
Something
that
we
is
do.
ideal, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's inviting and exciting.
Exactly.
So you told
And-
her you're teaching the baby.
Well, yeah, and we just
Yeah.
had a mom, and I said it's really important that they don't skip crawling,
Mm-hmm.
or that at least they're on, my understanding was all fours, but
Yeah.
just even, where.
Well, if they're weight bearing, if you're getting a true weight bearing into their upper body, they're going to be in some 4 position, right? Like
Okay.
you can't. I mean, I guess they could do more of like an army crawl, but then they're really not getting that input into their hands also.
Right.
So
I know a friend of mine, her daughter never crawled. She literally cross-legged.
you're
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Literally scooched, not
Uh-huh.
even scooched, they bounced on her tip.
Hmm.
Interesting. I've never seen that before.
That I
Even
learned
I learned
something.
it. Yeah, no, that was
So
first
that
time I
makes me
seen
think
it.
of my finger, I don't like that. That was painful.
I'm sure.
Yeah, okay, but that's good, a tunnel, let's look for a
Yeah,
tunnel. Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
Maybe Robin knows.
They have them on Amazon for like under $20 too. They might even have them like at.
Okay, I'll get it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like, I wish all the teachers can see.
Oh, I mean, well, it's recorded, so
yeah.
you can tell them they can watch it. That's what I told my teacher, because she was like, "Oh, I wish I could see it." I'm like, "I think it's going to be recorded, so you can
Yeah.
watch it."
I'm gonna edit
Even
it.
though at the beginning, apparently you couldn't hear, so I didn't know.
But I
Sorry.
will send out the paperwork.
I was like, I'm talking really loud. I feel like I don't need the microphone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Honestly,
You're
thank you
welcome.
so much. I learned so many.
Of course.
new things, so love it.
Thank you. All right. Jennifer, do you want me to email the invoice to you or to?
So you can email it to me.
Okay,